In the previous chapter, we observed the great influence that the industry has over the global political system. Here, we'll have a look at how elected officials and environmental regulators are industry accessories used for breaching and cover-up.
Before I start, I'll talk a little about group psychopathology. That will also be referenced in Chapter 17. A group controlled by psychopaths can be used for the total opposite of its label and objectives. So if you invert the description of such an organization, you'll have its actual purpose. We'll see some examples of that in this documentary. I've noticed that environmental regulators and government officials are doing the following to support the financial elite in their global soft kill and ecocide campaign. Not conducting full environmental impact statements, allowing pollution, covering up pollution, not fining or shutting down offenders, underreporting and not reporting contamination, ignoring complaints of contamination, hiding complaints and falsifying records, exploiting environmental loopholes to allow pollution, outlawing peaceful resistance to pipeline projects. At this time, I will describe each of these in detail. Regulators are issuing erroneous and illegal permits by not providing full environmental impact statements for projects that will severely affect the environment and citizens in the targeted zone. Regulators legally and illegally allow the pollution. They've given corporations permission to dump hazardous drilling waste on public roads. They've okayed the contamination of aquifers that are the source of drinking water, essentially making it legal for corporations to poison our water supplies. Overall, they've authorized the use and release of noxious substances that they know are harmful to the environment and human life. When significant pollution occurs, regulators and governments work with the offending corporation to mislead the public regarding the extent of damage to the environment. This corporate government team has been known to pacify the affected people and general public by telling them that the environment is fine and there's no threat to wildlife. They have also denied the danger posed to human health from these attacks and have encouraged people to consume water and food that is obviously contaminated. Regulatory agencies can bring disciplinary charges against offending industrial corporations, including fining and shutting them down. However, even when they know of unlawful pollution, regulators turn a blind eye. Often, they do not even fine the industry for unlawful emissions. They rarely shut down operations that they know are causing gross pollution and human disease. Theoretically, these state agencies protect the environment and human health. In reality, they defend the ecocidal criminals. in addition to not halting destructive projects when the same corporation continually offends, they sometimes do not inform the public of contamination. Regulators have been known to significantly reduce the size of disasters in their reports to make them appear less hazardous. It seems they're doing all they can to ensure the uninterrupted flow of pollution that sickens residents. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, for instance, has not only actively hidden water contamination caused by fracking and not fined or disciplined companies for their pollution. In one of its settlements, the DEP required that affected landowners refrain from warning nearby residents of contamination. Some regulatory agencies have been known to outright ignore a substantial amount of complaints. Other regulators have resorted to hiding complaints. They alter grievance records made by people who have been harmed by these projects. They cover up injuries by diluting the testimonies of affected people. Regulators have even altered lab reports in order to dismiss people's claims that extractive projects have contaminated their water and made them sick. What this basically amounts to is falsifying complaint records and adopting a multifaceted approach to hide contamination from the public. Not only do politicians usually refrain from enacting laws to prevent the industry from contaminating the environment, some have attempted to weaken environmental protection laws and downsize regulatory agencies. Regulators have succeeded in lowering standards so industrial corporations can increase their lawful pollution. Politicians in Texas have changed zoning codes so dangerous projects can occur closer to homes and public places. The Environmental Protection Agency and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers exploited a loophole in the Clean Water Act so mining companies can dump toxins closer to water supplies. The EPA finagled another breach to let oil companies discharge fracking waste on indigenous land. Congress also manipulated a loophole in the Safe Drinking Water Act so fracking companies can contaminate groundwater. Politicians in Colorado and Pennsylvania have passed laws that force some people to open their land to fracking. Texas politicians proposed legislation that requires cities that banned fracking to pay the state for lost revenue and have attempted to suppress public meetings that are in opposition to fracking. Politicians have proposed and have been able to pass critical infrastructure laws that banish peaceful resistance to pipelines. So far, over a dozen American states have approved these laws that label peaceful resistance a felony. Extractive corporations have lobbied tremendously for these laws. All of the anti-protest bills introduced or ratified in Minnesota, West Virginia, and Louisiana were sponsored or authored by legislators who received substantial funding from industrial corporations. So in these states where such laws have been established, the constitutional right to free speech and gather to resist these weapons of mass destruction has been trampled. Other legal actions have been launched to extinguish defense against these clandestine attacks. Politicians in West Virginia have attempted to rewrite laws in order to protect the industry from complaints of disturbance and pollution. So far, 2 states, Ohio and Texas, have made it illegal for a city to ban fracking. Some towns in these states decided to prohibit fracking because their regulators and elected officials were unsupportive when they were told that these projects were recklessly close to schools and homes. So in a desperate attempt to defend themselves from the irritating noise and sickening chemicals, they banned fracking in their towns. Shortly after, Texas politicians and the Ohio Supreme Court overruled their bans. I surmise there are still decent regulators, politicians, and other public servants who are concerned about public health and the environment. However, I think a majority of regulators are compromised. Like I said in the previous chapter, it's the same with the politicians. It's obvious to me that they are devoted to this international crime network. My interpretation of their activity in regard to this phenomenon is this: when siding with and protecting these ecological war machines, they are not making mistakes. Their decisions are not misjudgments based on incorrect data. They know what they're doing. They know what this is about. They are totally aware that they are deceiving the public, paving the way for and covering up deliberate contamination, and that their complicity ultimately equals mass murder. I've determined that these elected officials and regulators have knowingly betrayed the human race. At this time, I'd like to read a quote from The Guardian that I think accurately portrays the attitude of most politicians and regulators in the U.S. and elsewhere in regard to the pollution and disease that's intentionally caused by these ecological attacks. Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Corbett and most of the state's politicians have embraced fracking as a terrific boost for the economy. Water well contamination, spills, truck diesel emissions, migrating methane, and radioactive waste leaked into rivers have generally been dismissed as minor concerns. So according to these elected officials, and evidently various state-level regulatory agencies, the following conditions are acceptable collateral damage for extractive projects: chronic contamination of water supplies, aquifers irreversibly tainted, rendering wells unusable, private streams and ponds impaired by accidental spills, non-stop audio-visual stress, mass livestock die-offs, sick livestock aborting babies, farm animal stillbirths and birth defects, poisoned crops that can't be sold or eaten, lowered property value, people abandoning contaminated property, deadly, stinking fumes migrating to hospitals, homes, schools, and playgrounds. People suffering from all sorts of medical conditions like respiratory problems, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, radiation and barium poisoning, skin lesions, sore throats, memory loss, blurred vision, rashes, headaches, and liver, heart, and lung disease. People dying. All minor concerns.
Although greed and corruption are part of the equation, when observing the damage caused by extractive projects, I think the intertwined depopulation and biosphere impairment agendas must be taken into account in order to properly understand the situation. The stories of misery and mortality caused by fracking in Pennsylvania that I just read to you are the intended effects.